Alrighty, it is my great privilege to invite to the stage my friend and fellow pastor, James Beck. Can we give him a proper welcome? Not a half-ass one. Yeah, that's good. I like that. That's better.
Kia ora, Ames. Thanks for that. Tēnā rā tātou katoa. Last night, me and my little family had dinner at a friend's house. I'm telling you that because I want you to know that we have friends. And we get invited places sometimes. And we took all three of our kids and our dog, and it was chaos. But they invited us back again, and I'm very much looking forward to going, especially because it meant I didn't have to cook dinner, and that was great. But my girl, my Tilly, she's great. She found at these people's house, she found one of those like little music boxes. So the little cardboard thing, and you do the little, it's got a tiny little handle, and it's like ding, 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 ding. I don't know the song, but it was really beautiful. And so she was just like, it was enchanted to her, and so she was asking all these questions about it. And the people told her that it had come from Germany. And so I was intrigued to see what Tilly knew about Germany. So I said to her, so Tilly, do you know where Germany is? And she pauses, it's like she's on the spot. And she goes, I think it's on the other side of the world. And I was like, yeah, it is on the other side of the world. And then she goes, yeah. And I think that there used to be lots of bad guys there, and they were called the Nasties. And I was like, yeah, they were called the Nasties. And they were nasties. And yeah, I tried not to laugh. And yes, Tilly, they were the nasties. And then in the car on the way home, I explained the difference. But I pointed out to her that in some ways she was right. Like they were, but in some ways she was wrong as well. And she needed a little bit more information to fully understand the thing that she was saying. And here's the thing that I think that experience can teach us. It's not just a random story. I'm going to make a point out of it. The point is this: the further away that we get from an event or a time in history, the easier it is to misunderstand it. And when that happens, we all find ourselves mistaking the Nazis for nasties in different ways. And so what I want to do to start this journey into the book of Colossians, which we started 2 weeks ago by me reading out a letter that I'd written to Amy. If you haven't checked that out, check that out. It's on the YouTube. What I want to do is just point out how quickly this happens. So this is going to involve some sort of interaction between me and you. Feel free to yell things out as long as they're polite. So first thing, who can remember exactly where they were when we went into level 4 lockdown in 2020? Hands up. Cool. Okay, a few people. So that was the 25th of March, 2020, through to the 13th of May. Wow, that was a long time and feels like a long time ago as well. Okay, who can remember where they were when Will and Kate got married? Anyone? Few people, good, okay. Who knows who Will and Kate are? Great, okay. So there's some shared contextual information here. But like, 200 years from now, if I was to stand here and say, who knows who Will and Kate are? Not everyone would know, right? So that was 2011, Will and Kate got married. Who can remember where they were when they found out that planes had flown into the Twin Towers? Wow, all of us, okay? So it was a really significant moment in pretty much all of our lives. Who can remember, and for whatever reason, who can remember New Year's Eve 1999? Okay, cool. Who knows why that was so significant? Y2K, that's right. We were all like, are all the planes going to fall out of the sky? You know, everyone had to turn their computer off before midnight just in case their computer turned into a, what are they called? What was that movie? Come on, brain. Do you remember the movie Gremlins? Anyway, I'm on a different thing. Anyway, I'm on a really different tangent there. Okay, when I say this, who knows exactly who said it and what it was about? You put your hand up, okay? I did not have sexual relations with that woman. You all instantly, that generates an entire story, a whole bunch of context. You can probably see the pictures of the people who were involved. You remember details about that, and all I gave you was a few words, right? Who knows where they were when they found out that Diana had died? Okay, we all know who Diana is, right? I don't have to give you any more context there. This is shared information for all of us. I'm going to keep going. Who knows what a Tamagotchi is? Okay, cool. I just wanted to do one more 90s reference. Man, a Tamagotchi was like the pinnacle of my childhood desires, and I got the knockoff crap version because my family were poor. Okay, who can remember where they were when they found out that the Rainbow Warrior had been sunk? Great. Who knows what the Rainbow Warrior is? Fantastic. Okay. Who can remember seeing the All Blacks play South Africa on TV during the 1981 tour? Cool. Has anyone got a picture in their mind of what that looked like? Okay, great. Who knows what Save Manapuri was all about? Okay, cool. If you don't know, it was a massive deal. There were like almost 10 years worth of protests and all sorts of things about raising the level of Lake Manapuri to get electricity to the Tiwai shelter. And the largest petition in New Zealand's history to that point was presented to government. 260,000 people opposed that, and that was in the 70s. Okay, who can remember where they were when they found out that the Wahine sunk? Great. Now, you're not admitting that you're old, but you've been around for a while. Okay, so that was in 1968. Who can remember New Zealand before we had decimal currency? Good. A few people. That's cool. Okay. Who knows what a half crown is? Who doesn't know what a half crown is? There we go. Okay. So we're near on 70 years backwards there. The last half crown was minted in 1965. 60-ish years. And half of the room knows what I'm talking about and has relationship and understanding, and half of the room has no idea what a half crown is. Yeah, this is interesting. We'll do one more, eh? Who knows where they were when they heard that Edmund Hillary had climbed Everest? Does anyone remember reading in the newspaper that Edmund Hillary had climbed Everest? Few people, that's great. So, not to point out how old you are, but that was 1953. Okay, so I could keep going, but my point is a really, really simple one. You don't have to go back that far in history until there are only a few people who can understand those events in their original context. People who were there. People who could talk about not just having a picture of the All Black Springboks tour, but remember a divided country. They can remember the types of conversations that people were having and trying to wrestle through that themselves. For me, that's a few years before I was born, only a few. But still, I didn't have to live through it. I only understand that through something that other people have passed on to me. Yes? Okay, so that is why it's so important when we're trying to engage with a letter that Paul wrote to a church in Colossae. It's so important to understand its context, because we're trying to do that. We're trying to understand its context. And from this moment to when it was written, we've got about 2,000 years. We're talking about how difficult it is to understand the context of something that happened 70 years ago. We're trying to go back 2,000 years to drop this letter into its original context. And so it's not impossible, but it is difficult. And so what I'm going to try to do today as we launch into this series is to offer a bit more context around the letter to the Colossians, and hopefully it will help us begin to get our head and our heart and our hearts around this letter, that the Spirit might speak to us today in the same way that the Spirit spoke to its original audience. You with me? Cool, so let's go on the journey. The first context I want to drop it in is into its biblical context, and I made a flash slide for this. It just says it's biblical context. Is there a Bible? Who's got a Bible? Can I borrow someone's Bible? Someone must have one. Yes, thank you. There we go, there's one. Oh, yeah, I'll take the worn one. There we go. Thank you. Oh, look at that. This is a sign of righteousness. Okay, so I just want to sort of point something out. The letter of Colossians is here in the story. There. It's about 4 chapters long. Well, it is 4 chapters long. It's about 2 pages in most Bibles. And it sits in a collection of letters which are about About that. There are about 21 New Testament letters. That's almost all of them. That's them in their biblical context just to see this. They sit within the New Testament, which is this bit. Just this bit. And so they come off the back of all of that. And this is the Hebrew Scriptures. Well, it's our version of the Hebrew Scriptures. They're in a different order and stuff. But this is the Hebrew Bible. And so the Hebrew Bible is the introduction to the New Testament, and the New Testament starts with Gospels that didn't get written until very, very late in the piece. And so what we get is these 21 letters that actually sit in the time between the last book of the Old Testament and the writing of the 4 Gospels and Acts. So it's really, really interesting to remember that when Paul is, thank you for your Bible, that was really helpful, and it is beautifully worn. Here we go. When we are reading Paul's letters, we are reading about a specific time in the church. And it's a specific time that's off the back of a massive journey of God's arc of salvation throughout human history. So the Bible starts, yes, we're going to do a quick summary, with creation, and he creates humans, Adam and Eve, and he's wanting to bless all humans through Adam and Eve and his relationship to them. Adam and Eve define good and evil on their own terms, and so they get kicked out of the garden, and then humanity just like unravel across the next 11 chapters of the biblical narrative until they get to Babel, where they're like, we are going to make a name for ourselves. We're going to make ourselves like gods. We're going to take the latest technology at our fingertips, and we're going to make a name for ourselves. At which point God scatters humanity. And straight after that, he picks one man and his family and his descendants. And his promise to him is, through you and your family, all the nations are going to be blessed. This is the whole thing. God's original plan to bless all the nations, humans were just messing it up. So he's like, okay, maybe through you and your family. And so that starts a subplot, which is the history of the nation and the people of Israel. And so God tries to use this group of people to bless all the nations. And it doesn't go particularly well. The prophets warn them time and time again about their original calling, and they fail to live up to it. And so God takes them into exile. And in exile, they begin to dream about the way in which they as a people could begin to be a blessing to all nations again. But to do that, they dream of a new king, a new priest, a new Moses, a new David. They dream of this Messiah who is going to come and rescue the people, put them back on course so that finally the people of Israel will be able to be a blessing to the nations. Is that summary okay? Cool. We believe that person is Jesus. The claim that the Gospels make is that that person of Jesus is Jesus. But when we get the letter to the Colossians, the Gospels don't exist yet. What we've got is a whole lot of people who have experienced Jesus, heard stories about Jesus, heard hymns about Jesus, and there's these Jewish people going, well, he's a Jewish Messiah, but this Messiah has begun to bless all the nations, and so there are these people who aren't Jewish going, but we're in on this too, and they're having to work out what that means. What does it mean for this group of people to have ended up being a blessing to the world, but now they kind of want people to be Jewish? This is the tension we find all the way through these letters. So that's this story in its place, in its biblical context. I think Luke actually sums it up really well. So this is Luke 24, 44 to 49. So this is after Jesus has come back from the dead. Jesus says to his disciples, "These are the words that I spoke to you while I was still with you." This is him explaining what he did on the cross. "Everything must be fulfilled that is written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms," so in the Old Testament. Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures. And he told them, this is what the Old Testament is about. That the Christ, the Messiah, will suffer and rise from the dead on the third day, and in his name, repentance and forgiveness of sins will be proclaimed to all nations, beginning in Jerusalem, and you will be witnesses to these things. And behold, I'm sending the promise of my Father upon you, but remain in the city until you have been clothed with power on high. Their point in the story is that Jesus has fulfilled everything that was promised, and now this Messiah and his church are going to go and be a blessing to all the nations. This is good news. If it wasn't for this, we wouldn't be woven into this beautiful promise, but that brings with it some challenges. But because of Jesus' death and resurrection, all nations have been invited into his movement. It's good news. Okay, now I want to try and drop it a little bit into its historical context. This is stuff that I know that I love too much. Don't worry, this will land in us thinking about what it means for us. So, the historical context, here's a map of Colossae. Oh, this map's great. So the red dots represent the churches that John in the Revelation that he wrote to, and you'll see that Colossae is just next to Laodicea. It's in the middle of like modern day Turkey. It's up this random valley. It's sort of inland from Ephesus, but really interestingly, it was on the Silk Road trade network. And so it was connected to ideas and beliefs from the far east, and it was connected to ideas and beliefs from the far west. And it's an old city. Change slide, bro. So I know that this is geeky. I love this, but I'm going to take you on the journey anyway. So in 612 BC, Babylon destroyed Assyria. There's actually heaps written about that in the Bible. That's when Nineveh gets destroyed. And basically the Assyrian Empire stops existing almost overnight. It would be as if like America, for no apparent reason today, just collapsed overnight and it didn't exist anymore. So in 586, Babylon, who were the superpower at that time, they destroyed Jerusalem. That's the start of the exile. And then in 539, this random people group under this guy called Cyrus the Great, called the Persians, they rise up and they conquer Babylon, and that's when they set the Israelites free and they get to go back to Jerusalem. In 499 to 488, the Persians attack ancient Greece. So if you know the story of 300, that happened there when the 300 Spartans fight against millions and millions of Persians. In 430 BC, there's this Greek historian, a guy called Herodotus, who writes about the city of Colossae. So he says Xerxes was cruising around and he came to Colossae, which is a great city in Phrygia. And there, the river Lycus plunges into a cleft in the earth and disappears until it reappears about 5 stadia away. The reason that's interesting is because near Colossians, there was this river that just disappeared. And then there were about 500 meters, and then it reappeared from the water. So there was this entire river, God, angel, worship, cleansing thing going on at Colossae. Click again, bro. No, other way. There we go. Okay, a few more dates. In 370, there was this guy called Xenophon who he was a Greek soldier. He got hired by the Persians to go and fight in their civil war, and the king he was fighting for got killed, and so he had to run away from Persia all the way back to Greece without getting killed by the Persians. It's an incredible story that you can still go and read. Anyway, he writes about Colossae as well. Am I going to go? No, big tangent. I won't go there. Okay, so the Persian Empire exists for about 150 years, and then Alexander the Great invades Persia and conquers it. He conquers basically the known world in about 12 years, and then he dies. But while he conquered the known world, he spread the Greek language and Greek culture everywhere. So this little town in Turkey has been around for 300 years at this point, and then it becomes this Greek city. After Alexander dies, his empire splits up into all these little sub-empires, and the Colossae is run by the Seleucids. It's just fun to know. Then in 190, the Romans attack and destroy it, and so it becomes part of the Roman Empire. In 63 BC, Rome take control of Jerusalem. In 44 BC, Caesar is murdered. In 4 BC, because the guy who did the maths on when Jesus was born got it wrong. In 4 BC, Jesus is born. In 36 AD, Stephen is stoned. In 50 AD is the Council of Jerusalem that we read in Acts 15, where they work out what it's going to mean for non-Jewish Christ followers to be part of the family. And then in 60 AD, Paul writes Colossians from prison. My point here is, and I know I've taken a really long way to do it, but for people who enjoy this stuff, that would have been fun. My point here is by the time Paul writes the letter to the Colossians, that city has been around for over 500 years. It has had about 4 different kingdoms or empires rule over it. There are people there from all over the known world who have all sorts of different religious beliefs, who have all sorts of different languages, who have all sorts of different practices. And there's this small group in the middle of this old city, in the middle of Turkey, in the middle of the Silk Road, trying to work out how to follow Jesus. The reason this is so important to point out is because in some ways that's very similar to our world, and in some ways that's very different. Like, New Zealand's been around for almost 200 years. America first got settled in the 1600s, so the European settlement of America has happened for about 380-ish years. The city of Colossians had been around for 500 years by the time Paul writes this letter, and he's telling these people that there's this new king that they can follow, and it changes everything about their lives. So it's different, and yet it's similar. If you think about our Western globalized world, in the West, English is the main language, right? In the same way that back then Greek was the main language. And so we have this ability to share different ideas, different political views, different religions, different beliefs across the world and across our country. And yet, at the same time, we're trying to work out what it looks like to give our allegiance to Jesus while we are constantly being bombarded with all sorts of different ideas, concepts, information about all sorts of different things. A huge part of Paul's letter to the Colossians is about helping them to understand Jesus in relation to the smorgasbord of peoples, cultures, ideas, and religions that they were all surrounded with at the time. So it's about back then, but it's about here and now as well. We all tracking? Cool. Okay. One more bit of context, and then I'm going to try and land it for us. The background context, can you chuck the next slide up, man? That'd be great. What's really interesting about Paul's letter to the Colossians, unlike a heap of his other letters, is Paul didn't actually plant the church there. It tells us in Colossians 1 that a guy called Epaphras, cool name, who had met Paul in Ephesus, that guy was so fired up by the gospel that he basically walked inland in every city he went to, so like Laodicea and I can't remember the name of that one, and Colossae. He planted these little communities of people that followed Jesus. And so Epaphras is this amazing guy. He's hanging out in these churches he's planted, but then he starts to realize that what's going on in these churches is not quite right. There are two big groups of people. It seems that there were some Jewish people in the church who were basically saying that if you really wanted to follow Jesus, you needed to follow Jewish food laws, you needed to follow the Jewish calendar, you needed to pray to the right angel, and you probably needed to get circumcised. And then there were a bunch of super woke Gentiles who thought that Jesus was really cool, but they kind of added him to their already existing pantheon of different religious beliefs and gods. So they've got Zeus that they'll pray to for this thing, they've got Artemis that they'll pray to for this thing, they've got Jesus that they'll pray to for this thing. Then they've got these Jews going, you need to eat like this and do this, and they're like, oh no, I've got Artemis for that. Anyway, so Paul is in prison at the time. Epaphras comes and says to him, hey man, things are getting a bit weird in the church that I planted. And Paul's like, we should write to them. Paul's never met these people. He's never planted this church. And so he's writing this encouraging letter to try and correct some of the ways that the church has started to go off on a tangent that Paul doesn't agree with. So with this in mind, with all of this context, we're going to try and just jump into what the letter is about. And here's what I do when I'm studying a letter from the Old Testament, from the New Testament. I don't know, there are Old Testament letters. Jeremiah 29 is an Old Testament letter, that's a different thing. But when I'm studying a New Testament letter, the thing I try to do is try and summarize each chunk of thought, really big picture, so I can kind of see where I am in the story. So that's the last thing we're going to do today. I'm going to offer you a summary of what happens in Colossians, and then in light of some of the context that I've offered, start to reflect on what that might mean for us, and then we're going to spend the next 3 months walking through that. So, can you change slide, Mr. Bro? One more? One more? Here we go. This is my attempt at a summary of the book of Colossians. This is my summary of chapter 1. It is by grace that you have given your allegiance to King Jesus, who is above all, before all, and superior to all things. There's something miraculous that God has done, which has opened up the possibility for people to be able to put their trust and loyalty in King Jesus. And King Jesus isn't just another deity, he is the God of all. Thing 1. Chapter 2. Can you change it, bro? Jesus made peace through the cross, which is a story worth becoming a slave to. So don't get sucked into adding extra ideas or extra beliefs onto the good news. Jesus made peace through the cross. You can live in right relationship with God. And when you fully understand that, it calls you to become a servant to the gospel. That's what Paul goes on about. And then he goes, and if that's true, don't get sucked into adding extra ideas or beliefs onto the good news that you've already heard. The good news is good news. You don't need to make it better. Chapter 3 is your ethnicity, your gender, your diet, or whatever other ideas you claim are important are not as important as letting Jesus' Spirit work through you, because he changes everything. The fruits of the Spirit demonstrate that you are his disciple, not following laws. And then chapter 4, so let Jesus change the way that you use your power and relate to people with power in every single relationship that you have. And to demonstrate that point, Paul sends Onesimus, who used to be a slave, in their midst, but he now wants them to welcome him as a brother and as an equal. Can you think of how crazily outrageous that would have been at the time? Onesimus is this Greek word which means useful. And when Paul writes the letter to Philemon, he goes, Onesimus was useless to you, but now he is useful. And it's this like really cool play on words. Anyway, I'm just going to read that as a flow of thought through again, and then we'll just walk through how that actually might land for us as we wrap up. It is by grace that you have given your allegiance to King Jesus, who is above all, before all, and superior to all things. Jesus has made peace through the cross, which is a story worth becoming a slave to. So don't get sucked into adding extra ideas or beliefs onto that good news. Because your ethnicity, your gender, your diet, or whatever ideas you claim are not as important as letting Jesus' Spirit work through you, which changes everything. And the fruits of the Spirit demonstrate that you are his disciple, not keeping laws. So, let Jesus change the way that you use your power and relate to people with power in every single relationship that you have. And to demonstrate that point, Paul sends a slave and says, welcome him as a brother. What a letter. And we're going to be walking through what this means. So that's my best attempt. I'm not saying that's perfect. I'm just saying for me, that's helped me to understand how this works. So I want to finish with just a couple of questions. The first thing that Paul gets at is where we give our allegiance. My question is a really simple one. Do we give our allegiance to things other than Jesus? And the answer is yeah. Yep, all the time. We have a tendency to put our family or our health or our finances or our job or our friends or our possessions or relationships or whatever it is. We have a tendency to elevate other stuff above Jesus, and then we worship it and we give it our time and our attention. The first thing that Paul's getting at here is put your life in the right order, and the right order is Jesus is king. Second question, do we get tempted to add extra ideas to our allegiance to King Jesus? Yeah, sometimes we do. Sometimes it's our politics. You know, if people just believed in the same political theory I believed in, which is clearly the same political theory that Jesus believes in, then the kingdom of heaven would come on earth. Sometimes it's our diet. You know, I've met so many people over the years who like the thing that they're like, this would put the world to rights if everyone just ate paleolithically, because bread's ruining everything. Now, I'm not to say that diet doesn't matter, but I'm sure you've met those people who diets become like the thing that's going to put the world to rights. Do you know what I mean? Or sometimes it's our our favorite personality profiling tool. This is how the kingdom's going to come. If everyone just understands that I'm, a 2 on the Enneagram, and you need to change how you relate to me. You guys know what I'm talking about here? These are all the different things that it's like, this is how we're going to put the world back together. Or sometimes it's our theology or our religious preferences. You know, we have this lovely way of saying our religious preference by pointing out things that are anointed and not anointed. Anyway, here's how this sounds in practice. man, if that person was really a Christian, they'd vote for my party. If that person really followed Jesus, they wouldn't eat dairy because of the impact that's having on the environment. If that person really followed Jesus, they should care that I'm a 2 on the Enneagram. If that person really followed Jesus, then they'd go to church services every single Sunday like the Bible tells us. If that person really followed Jesus, then they would agree that penal substitutionary atonement is the most biblical atonement theory. You guys with me? And I'm kind of joking here, and at the same time, I'm really serious. Like, there are literally thousands and thousands of denominations within the Protestant church because we have a tendency to let stuff divide us as opposed to understanding our allegiance to King Jesus. We have a tendency to add things and make them really important. I'm sure there are people in this room who have had great and terrible experiences about people saying that you cannot be saved unless you speak in tongues, right? This was a really big deal for a while there. We have a tendency to want to add our extra things or our preferences to Jesus, and wisdom is knowing which of those things really matter and which of those things really don't. Yeah? Okay, and last 2 questions. Do we have a tendency to evaluate people based on their gender, ethnicity, religion, influence, or what they can offer us, or what they do for a job? I think, unfortunately, yeah, we do. Yeah. I think we're invited to see people as God's image bearers, but too often we have a habit of depersonalizing people into rivals that we compete with. The question is, are we actually working towards the true measure of what matters in God's kingdom, the fruits of the Spirit, the true markers of a disciple, the things that matter far more than how often you go to church or how often you pray? And my hope is that that's where Colossians can help set us in the right path again, set us in the right ways. There will be some of this that for you is absolutely not a problem. There'll be other pieces of this that this is a thing for you. And so I hope that the Spirit works in and through the journey that we're going to go on to help us to, as Paul says, to be in step with the Spirit as we walk in the world. So I guess the last question that I'd love you to sit with as the band can come up, we're going to play a few songs as we reflect on all that's gone before us this morning. Are we willing to let King Jesus have his way in our lives again? Are we willing to let him turn everything upside down? Are we willing to follow him wherever he would call us? Because there will be, as we go through this book, some things that Jesus invites us to change in our lives. Just the same way he asked the Colossians to change things, he's going to invite us to change things too. My question this morning, and the thing I'd love you to reflect on as we're worshiping, is if you are open to that, or if you've become complacent with how things are. Jesus doesn't seem to me to work against us. He works in partnership with us. So my simple hope is that as we work through this letter, we would afresh feel called and convicted to become more like the people we were always created to be. So we're gonna sing. And my invitation to you is to bring your heart and your life before Jesus and say, as we enter this season, is there anything that you want to bring to my attention? Is there anything that you've been speaking to me about for a while that I've been hardened about? And I pray that there's a willingness to open ourselves again to what God wants to do in and through our lives.